Welcome to Blessed Be the Breakdown, the podcast where I dissect the Handmaid's Tale, explore its themes, and uncover real-world parallels that make it all the more terrifying. The cracks in Gilead are widening, but its leaders remain ruthless in their response. Meanwhile, June's choices become more complex. She's not just resisting anymore, she's actively seeking justice, revenge, and in some ways power. We'll cover the key events of Season 4, explore themes of uprising and justice, and compare them to real-world authoritarianism and resistance. If you haven't watched the show yet, I highly recommend doing so to fully understand what I'm discussing. So let's dive in. As always, we will start by comparing some of the Season 3 themes to those in Season 4. In Season 3, we really saw the power struggle and cracks in Gilead. Some of the key themes being revenge and power claim, June stepping into leadership, taking more dangerous risks, the fragility of Gilead, fighting among commanders, Serena questioning her role, mothers and children, June's fight to reunite with Hannah, Serena's shifting stance on Nicole, resistance and sacrifice. The handmaids, Martha's, and allies take greater risks for freedom. Power and betrayal. Serena betrays Fred. June lets Eleanor die. And we see a shift in Gilead's power. Now in Season 4, we will see more of revolution and consequences. Some of the key themes being survivors' guilt and trauma, exile and political refugees, revenge versus justice, women's rage and power, and how societies ignore atrocities. So in Season 4, June is no longer just surviving. She's actively fighting back. But as we've seen time and time again, Gilead does not let rebellion go unanswered. The cost of resistance is steep, and this season forces us to reckon with what happens when you push back against an authoritarian regime. Season 4 begins with June and the fugitive handmaid seeking refuge at a rural farm run by the Keyes family. This setting immediately establishes a shift in tone. The women are no longer confined within the rigid structures of Gilead cities, but are instead navigating the dangers of the open world, where both freedom and new threats exist. The farm itself is an eerie liminal space, removed from the immediate grasp of Gilead's government, but still deeply entrenched in its violent and oppressive culture. Meanwhile, the Waterfords, who are now in Canada, are shaken by the news that children and Martha's have escaped Gilead, with June being the one who orchestrated it. Serena's hatred for June continues to simmer beneath the surface, even as they process the shock of what has occurred. Back in Gilead, we are introduced to Esther Keyes, the teenage wife of Commander Keyes. With her husband senile and powerless, Esther finds herself in a precarious position, both as a young girl forced into marriage and as a survivor of repeated sexual abuse at the hands of the men who visit the farm. Her trauma manifests in deeply unsettling ways. She oscillates between admiration for June and an intense, almost fanatical hunger for revenge. Despite her youth, she asserts her dominance with a presence that almost mirrors a mini Serena, except she refuses to align with Gilead. This becomes evident in her outbursts towards both June and Janine, revealing that beneath her commanding exterior, she is still very much a child. Lacking the maturity to regulate her emotions, she expresses them in cruel and impulsive ways. Esther represents a new kind of victim in Gilead, one who has learned that violence is the only means of control she has left. Her brutal murder of the guardian who repeatedly assaulted her is not just an act of vengeance, it is a survival mechanism, an assertion of power in a world that has stripped her of all agency. We get a scene of June and Esther where this was right after Esther has yelled at Janine for not wanting to eat dinner. June confronts her and tells her, hey, ease up, these girls have all been through a lot. And that's when we find out about Esther's sexual abuse and what she's been through, and that she has essentially been a handmaid herself. We also see June essentially take on the role of Aunt Lydia during the murder of the guardian. This moment also sets the stage for a reoccurring theme in Season 4. How trauma warps individuals, pushing them to adopt the same cruelty that was once used against them. In the scene where Esther is murdering the guardian and June is standing right there, we really see her taking on the role of Gilead, essentially, where she is listing off the guardian's crimes. And we see this happen throughout Season 4, where June especially will take the words that were said to her or actions that were done to her and repeat them back to the people who oppressed her. June's relationship with Esther is complex and unsettling. For much of the series, June has been the victim fighting back, but in this scenario, she becomes somewhat of a mentor to Esther, a role that is both empowering and dangerous. Esther idolizes June, seeing her as a figure of rebellion and strength. However, this idolization is laced with a disturbing eagerness for bloodshed. June, hardened by her own experiences, encourages Esther's defiance, but it is clear that Esther's anger lacks the strategic control that June has developed over time. This dynamic foreshadows later developments in the season, particularly as we see how trauma and vengeance impact each character differently. As the season progresses, Commander Lawrence finds himself in Gilead's custody, and this is where his alliance with Nick really begins. We also see Aunt Lydia face the fallout of the Handmaid's escape, leading to an intense internal conflict within the regime. She seems to have received punishment, as she once delved out. Aunt Lydia, who has always been a figure of both discipline and cruelty, finds herself increasingly desperate to maintain her position of power. Her interactions with Gilead's leadership expose fractures within the system. Commanders who once presented as a united front now begin to clash over the best way to maintain control. Some see the Handmaid's rebellion as an isolated incident, while others fear it could be the beginning of a much larger uprising. This division among the ruling class is crucial, as it highlights the instability within Gilead's government, making it clear that the regime is not as unshakable as it once seemed. In Canada, we see Rita speaking and praising June for helping the Marthas and children escape. The lives of Moira, Emily, and Luke seem to be carrying on. Rita is rightfully trying to adjust to her new life in Canada. June's resistance takes a new form when she learns that Esther has been poisoning her husband, a move that pushes June to take similar action. She comes up with a plan to poison some of the commanders at Jezebel's, and up until now she has largely been reacting to Gilead's horrors, surviving by outwitting her captors, but we see her take proactive steps to dismantle the regime this season. The use of nightshade, both a literal poison and a metaphor for stealthy, calculated rebellion, symbolizes how resistance can take many forms, not just open warfare. This highlights the evolution of June's leadership. She is no longer just a handmaid trying to escape. She's a revolutionary, willing to strike at the heart of Gilead's power structure. However, this also marks the beginning of her descent into moral ambiguity. Poisoning isn't just about resistance. It's about revenge and about showing Gilead that she isn't afraid to play dirty. Nick's internal conflict deepens the complexity of this season. As he climbs the ranks within Gilead, he must navigate the delicate balance of helping June while protecting his own position. His struggle epitomizes his timeless dilemma. Can meaningful change arise from within a corrupt system? Or does power inevitably corrupt even the most righteous intentions? In this season, Nick's journey sets the stage for profound questions about loyalty, love, and the heavy price of survival. And this really becomes evident when June returns to the farm from Jezebel's and she senses that something is wrong. And before we know it, the guard accompanying her is shot. As she reaches for his fallen gun, she is covered in lasers. We see Nick appear, demanding to know where the handmaids are, while also insisting that he's trying to help keep her alive. And we clearly see that he is trying to keep his status in Gilead in this situation while also trying to let her know that he is still on her side. Before we know it, June finds herself surrounded by guards, setting the stage for one of the most intense episodes of the series. Once again, she's muzzled in a black van. And when she reaches her destination, Nick is there waiting for her. He tells her the handmaids are still at large, and that Esther is in custody. He is urgently pleading with June to tell them where the handmaids are, claiming he wants to help. But Nick isn't the only one who's waiting for her. Soon we hear Aunt Lydia's chilling voice. June is then led into what looks like a prison with red lights filling the corridor. One of the standout moments in this particular episode is when June delivers one of her best comebacks to Aunt Lydia. She is laying on this table, and Aunt Lydia is telling her, "Tell him, dear, while God's merciful light still shines upon you." And then June says, "There's no light here. God has forsaken this place." And you can just see the horror on Aunt Lydia's face. And this is what I was talking about in the beginning, where I was saying that June really uses their words against them this season. And we'll see that again here in a second. The brutality of Gilead's authoritarian grip is on full display as June is subjected to relentless psychological and physical torment, proving once again that in this dystopian world, resistance comes at an excruciating cost. From the moment June is detained, she is stripped of any semblance of autonomy. She is transported to a dark, isolated facility where Aunt Lydia and other Gilead enforcers seek to break her spirit. But this is no ordinary interrogation. This is psychological warfare. The leaders of Gilead know that fear, pain, and emotional manipulation are far more powerful than brute force alone. They do not just want information. They want to once again break June. June, however, as we know, does not give in so easily. She even turns things around on Aunt Lydia by telling her that she failed them and that it's her fault. This really gets to Aunt Lydia, turning her tactics around on her. As we've seen, Aunt Lydia many times have the girls claim that it's their fault. It's June's fault, not Offred's fault. So this is just such a powerful thing in this season. And I know I've already said that like 3 times, but it just really is. Despite June being waterboarded and almost having her fingernails removed, she refuses to comply, clinging to the defiance that has fueled her for so long. However, Gilead does not rely solely on threats to achieve compliance. They put their words into actions. As June watches helplessly, they bring in the 2 Marthas that she was with at Commander Lawrence's, and one by one, they push them over the building in front of her. Each death is a brutal reminder that her silence carries consequences, not just for her, but for those around her. This is Gilead's justice system in its purest form. Public executions not as mere punishment, but as instruments of control. The spectacle of death is meant to crush any remaining hope, to force obedience through sheer terror. There is no room for mercy, no opportunity for true redemption. To Gilead, dissent is an infection that must be excised completely. Throughout this season, we see the alliance between Commander Lawrence and Nick start to grow, particularly as they begin to discuss June and Nick's relationship. Commander Lawrence even goes to visit June while she is being held in an attempt to get her to reveal where the handmaids are. One key moment I wanted to highlight is the chilling statement that Commander Lawrence makes to June when she's confronted with the reality that Gilead may hurt her daughter Hannah. He tells her Gilead doesn't care about children, Gilead cares about power. And up until this point, June truly thought that Gilead would not hurt her daughter. June fights against the inevitable as long as she can, her resilience seemingly unbreakable. But Gilead understands human nature all too well. They know that even the strongest rebels have a breaking point, and they choose to exploit her deepest vulnerabilities, preying on her love for Hannah. When June is faced with her daughter, it's not a reunion, it's a weapon. Gilead stages the encounter to inflict maximum pain, using Hannah's fear and confusion to shatter June's defenses. Hannah's terrorized expression and her seemingly recoiling from her mother, who she barely recognizes, is the final push that forces June to crumble. The agony of watching those around her suffer, coupled with the unbearable weight of losing Hannah yet again, proves to be too much. She gives up the location of the handmaids, not because she wants to, but because she has been pushed beyond the limit of what any human can endure. This moment is devastating, not just for June, but for the audience. We have seen her endure so much, fight so hard, and yet, in the end, even she is not immune to Gilead's cruelty. It is a painful but necessary reminder that resistance is not just about heroism, it is about survival. And survival sometimes means making impossible choices. June tells Aunt Lydia that she's ready for it all to end, expecting the relief of execution. However, she is met with a shocking revelation that she won't be executed. Instead, she and the others will be sent to a Magdalene colony, a horrifying breeding farm, where their fates will be far from the mercy of death. This twist not only intensifies June's despair, but also deepens the cruelty of Gilead's control over women, turning their bodies into tools of reproduction, which they've already done, but this is far more reaching than we've seen before with just normal handmaids. It is during this scene that Aunt Lydia seizes the moment to remind June that all of this is her fault, that she is the one who brought this fate upon herself and the other handmaids. We get one final conversation between Nick and June before she is put into the red van and taken away with Aunt Lydia and the previously escaped handmaids. Now we see them really embrace, and we can just clearly tell how much love they have for each other in this scene. And from an audience perspective, it's disheartening because you're thinking that they will never see each other again. However, once June is back in the van with the other handmaids, they seize a fleeting moment of opportunity. As the van stops unexpectedly, June, along with several others, act quickly, and they overpower Aunt Lydia, despite being in a small, confined space. Unfortunately, only June and Janine ultimately escape, as the other handmaids get caught by the train. This scene is intense, with tension rising as they scramble to evade capture, knowing that they face certain death if they're caught. It's a powerful moment of defiance, symbolizing the strength and resilience of the handmaids, even in the face of overwhelming odds. This act of escape highlights June's determination and the collective power of the handmaids to fight for their freedom, even when it seems like the odds are stacked against them. Now I'm going to be flip-flopping a little bit here, but back in Canada, we see Luke struggling with June's capture and beginning to question her motives. Why did she stay behind when she had so many chances to leave? His doubts reflect a shift in how June's actions are perceived, even by those closest to her. What was once seen as heroic resistance is now clouded by uncertainty, highlighting the internal conflict that has always driven June, and the blurred lines between resistance, survival, and betrayal. Now, June and Janine manage to escape and find themselves on a treacherous journey towards Chicago, where rebels are actively fighting against Gilead. We get more focus on Janine and June for a few episodes. We also get insight on Janine, her past, her trauma, and her desire to survive at all costs. Janine's backstory reveals she once sought an abortion, which immediately reminds us of why Gilead's theocracies exist in the first place: to control women's bodies. We also see Janine finally stand up to June. For much of their journey, Janine has been a follower, her loyalty to June unwavering, even when it meant sacrificing her own well-being. But in season 4, we see a different side of Janine, a woman who has been shaped by the brutalities of Gilead, and is no longer willing to quietly accept her place in June's shadow. Janine voices her frustration, not just with June's increasingly dangerous tactics, but with the way June seems to have lost touch with the humanity of those she's trying to save. And the reason I brought up the Luke thing a while ago is because this kind of correlates with a big theme we're seeing this season, and people are really starting to question June and her choices that she is making. And we really see this when Janine tells June, while they're in the milk truck, "You're not the only one who's been through hell, June. We all have. But you don't get to decide what's best for all of us. Not anymore." The tension between them is palpable, with June taken aback by Janine's boldness. She's used to being the one who holds the reins, the one who leads with conviction and defiance. But now, Janine is stepping up, asserting her own voice in a world where women's voices are often silenced. This confrontation between Janine and June is a turning point in their relationship, marking the moment when Janine no longer submits to June's will and June is forced to reckon with the impact of her actions on the people who have stood by her. Their bond is irrevocably changed, but it's also a moment of empowerment for Janine, one that redefines her role in the story and shows that even those who have been broken by Gilead can find their strength and voice. Upon June and Janine's arrival to Chicago, they quickly realize that the war is not so black and white. What they find isn't the peace they longed for, but a desperate struggle where the rules of morality and humanity are compromised for the sake of survival. Though the rebels fight for a cause they believe in, they are no different from Gilead in their willingness to sacrifice others for their own benefit. We get to see June, who has always held on to her sense of justice, find herself grappling with the question of whether survival justifies the means. The brutal reality of war, where every decision seems to come with a cost, hits hard, and both women are forced to reevaluate their expectations of what true resistance looks like. As June and Janine settle into the chaotic and unpredictable world of the rebels, one of the most striking challenges for June is adjusting to a life where she's no longer in charge. For so long, June has been the one leading, making the decisions, and driving the resistance forward, whether as a figurehead of rebellion or in her efforts to protect those she cares about. But in Chicago, the dynamics are different, and she's forced to step back and navigate a new role. June, who has spent years fighting against Gilead's tyranny with fierce determination and survival instincts, now faces the uncomfortable reality that she can't control everything anymore. She struggles to find her place among the rebels, many of whom have their own methods, priorities, and leadership styles. Where she was once a symbol of hope and strength, she's now just one person in a larger fractured movement. The shift is jarring, and June wrestles with the frustration of no longer being in a position of power, often questioning her value in this new environment. And speaking of shifts in power, we also see that Aunt Lydia seems to have been forcefully retired, and she is not taking it well. However, she approaches Commander Lawrence with a threat of sorts, trying to blackmail him, so she can get reinstated. And they are now in a "if I scratch your back, you scratch mine" collaboration. And one thing to point out in this season as well is the back and forth between Serena and Fred. As they are no longer a united front, we find out Serena is pregnant, and Serena is unfortunately trying to rope Rita in, asking her to help care for the baby. During this, she also mentions that she is not planning to tell Fred. Now, this really shows how skewed of a perspective Serena has, and it really kind of pisses Rita off. In an act of revenge, Rita meets with Fred and lets him know that Serena is pregnant. And taking that away from Serena gives her a sense of control, rightfully so. Back in Chicago, June ultimately decides to leave. And at first, Janine seems like she's gonna stay, but ends up going with June. And as they start out on their journey, they hear something. And before we know it, Gilead has dropped a bomb on all insurgent fronts, and June and Janine get caught in the blast. They are once again separated, but as June searches through the rubble for Janine, she spots Moira approaching. And in that moment, June and Moira are finally reunited. Moira, now working with an organization, tries to smuggle June onto a humanitarian boat bound for Canada. But June isn't ready to go. She feels an overwhelming responsibility to keep fighting. She wants to free Hannah, to keep resisting Gilead's tyranny. We are once again at a point where we, as viewers, are trying to figure out if June is finally going to escape. And luckily, Moira convinces June to go. Moira grabs June's arm and drags her into freedom as the ship pulls away. Once they reach Canada, Luke is waiting for her. His face is a mixture of hope and relief. But the reunion isn't as joyful as anyone would expect. June immediately apologizes to Luke for not having Hannah, and he comforts her. But June is no longer the woman he knew. She's hardened, broken by the horrors of Gilead, and carries the heavy weight of the past. It's not the homecoming Luke imagined, and June finds herself caught between the trauma of what she left behind and the reality of the freedom she's still struggling to accept. We see June try to reintegrate into a life that no longer feels like her own. The simple comforts of freedom, such as a warm bed, a hot shower, feel foreign to her now. She is placed in a luxurious hotel filled with fancy cheeses and other indulgences, but once the agents leave, it's just her and Luke. And their reunion is painfully awkward. After years of living completely separate lives, they are now strangers to each other. Luke, burdened with guilt, apologizes for failing to save her and Hannah. June tells him about her brief meeting with Hannah at the lake house, but she withholds the painful truth that Hannah was terrified of her when she was captured. Both of them are drowning in guilt, haunted by what was lost and what could have been. To the outside world, June is a fragile survivor, someone to be held with care, but in her mind, she is still a soldier, still fighting a war that didn't end when she crossed the border. In Canada, her weapon is her testimony. She recounts everything she endured in Gilead to the agents, hoping her words will make a difference. Yet despite her newfound freedom, the trauma that shaped her survival instincts refuses to let go. The contrast is jarring, and she can't shake the feeling that this world, this life, is no longer hers. When June meets Moira, Rita, and Emily, the weight of survivor's guilt settles heavy on her. She escaped, but so many others didn't. As they discuss their experiences and what comes next, Rita drops a bombshell. She has seen Serena, and she is pregnant with Fred's baby. And in the first encounter we see with June and Serena post-Gilead, Serena sends another wave of disorientation crashing over her. Serena shows no guilt, no remorse, only the same self-serving delusion that has always shielded her from accountability. She plays the victim, cradling her pregnancy as a shield, spinning a narrative where she is the one who has suffered. She even dares to suggest that June was brought to Canada so she could make amends. June's anger simmers, then boils over. She doesn't want an apology. She doesn't want to heal. She wants revenge. The power dynamic is flipped. What follows is a chilling reenactment of their past, except now it's June looming over Serena, her voice raising, her rage unrestrained. Years ago, Serena screamed in June's face, asserting her dominance. Now June returns the favor, unleashing every ounce of fury she has buried inside of her, with the line, "We all know, do you understand me?" Now I'm not going to attempt to say it because it's just too iconic, and I will insert a little clip here.
So that when he kills that baby inside your womb, you will feel a fraction of the pain that you caused us when you tore our children from our arms. Do you understand me? Do you understand me?
And that is just another instance of June flipping their words back on them. Once again, we see the anger that's been simmering inside June bursts forth when she takes the stand to testify against Fred Waterford in court. She recounts the horrors she endured: rape, abuse, psychological torment. But the legal system is ill-equipped to handle Gilead's crimes, and Fred's manipulation of the system becomes painfully clear. He might actually get a plea deal. In this moment, June realizes that true justice may never come through traditional channels. The law, it seems, can't deliver the vengeance she craves. In a shocking turn of events, we see that Fred and Serena, despite their crimes, have garnered a group of loyal supporters in Canada. The Waterfords use propaganda, selective storytelling, and public sympathy to reshape their image. Serena, in particular, leans into the role of persecuted wife and expected mother, drawing in those who see her as a victim rather than a perpetrator. Their followers are willing to overlook or even justify their past actions, believing that they represent something greater than their individual misdeeds. June, along with the other survivors, begin to confront their trauma in destructive ways. She encourages Emily to confront her former aunt, who has been living quietly in Canada. After Emily confronts Aunt Irene and refuses her apology, Aunt Irene ends up taking her own life. June and Emily don't feel remorse for their actions. Instead, they revel in it. The rage that's fueled their survival for so long now becomes their driving force. The structured sense of justice they once clung to has been replaced with an insatiable thirst for revenge. Now, one thing that really stands out about June and Luke's relationship in this season is the unexpected shift in their dynamic. Despite June being the one returning from the horrors of Gilead, she is the one who seems to be being strong for Luke, not the other way around. Luke, who spent years believing June was gone and wrestling with guilt over not saving her, is now faced with the reality of who she's become. He wants to pick up where they left off to offer comfort and stability, but June no longer fits into the life he's envisioned. She carries the weight of everything she's endured, yet she doesn't break, while Luke struggles to process it all. Their relationship is no longer built on the foundation it once was, and the roles they thought they'd play in each other's lives have completely shifted. June finally meets with Commander Lawrence, and her goal is clear: to negotiate for Hannah's freedom. But Lawrence's cold response shatters her hope. There's no easy way to get her back. At this point, we see June finally lets Luke know about her last interaction with Hannah, and how she was scared of her. Towards the end of the season, we start to see hints of jealousy or even resentment from Luke towards Nick. His wife has spent years in Gilead, forced into impossible choices, and the one person who provided her any sense of comfort or normalcy was another man. Of course, it's not as simple as an affair. Nothing in Gilead ever is. And June and Nick's relationship was born out of survival, not betrayal. But that doesn't make it any easier for Luke. He's been holding on to the idea of getting his wife back, but now that she's here, he's realizing she's not just his wife anymore. She's someone who's lived an entirely different life, one that Nick was a part of in ways Luke could never be. And that reality really stings, even if he knows it's not June's fault. But after the flop meeting with Lawrence, Luke thinks that June meeting with Nick will help in getting Hannah back. They arrange a meeting with Nick, Nicole, and June to discuss anything he may know about Hannah. And in true Nick fashion, showing how much he cares for June, he brings along a file with information on Hannah. And at this point, we see they really still care for each other. They kiss in front of the window as their daughter lies in front of them. We get a sense that June maybe feels more of a connection to Nick than Luke at this point, and this does make sense as they have both been in Gilead together recently, and going through that sort of trauma together, at least on June's part, can sort of build that trauma bond. As we get closer to the end of the season, we do see Esther again, and she is now at the Red Center, very much following in June's footsteps of resisting. We also see Janine has made it back to the Red Center, and she has decided to be, or try and be, a mentor of sorts to Esther, because Janine has been put in the position of being punished at the Red Center, and she does not want to see that happen to Esther. And that is the last in this season that we see of Gilead, really, other than No Man's Land. We end the season back in Canada as Fred manipulates the legal system, positioning himself as a valuable informant in exchange for leniency. June might have power, but she does not have control over the outcome or the legal system. And this realization pushes her to the edge. If the system won't deliver justice, she'll take it into her own hands. The season finale brings the culmination of June's transformation. With Mark Tuella's help, June orchestrates a plan to hand Fred over to Gilead in exchange for women imprisoned as political pawns. But instead of returning him to Gilead's justice system, June takes matters into her own hands. She leads Fred into the woods, where a group of former handmaids carry out an execution in the brutal manner Gilead used for their victims. Fred is beaten to death and strung up, just as they had done to so many dissenters. It's a moment of triumph, a long-awaited justice finally served, but it's also a moment of horror. June is no longer the woman who once fought for survival. She has become something else entirely. She isn't seeking justice anymore, she's just embracing vengeance. In the final shot, June cradles her baby in her blood-stained clothes. She's not ready to return to normal life. In fact, she may never be. Her transformation is complete, and the woman who once sought freedom now finds herself caught in the aftermath of what that freedom truly costs. So that wraps up season 4. So now let's get into some real-world parallels. Now, when I started this podcast, I really wasn't planning to explicitly focus on just America, but with new developments coming out daily, it's hard not to. So I want to start with a statement from Commander Lawrence that we've already been over in this episode, but it's when he visits June while she is held in prison. She insists that Gilead doesn't hurt children, to which he responds, "Gilead doesn't care about children. Gilead cares about power." Now, this statement struck me because it feels incredibly relevant to today's political climate. There are political systems that exploit people's fears and concerns rather than addressing their actual needs. For example, some Trump supporters are starting to realize that their trust in him was misplaced. Many believed his administration would focus on removing dangerous criminals, but instead policies were enforced indiscriminately, often targeting people based on race or ethnicity. Take the incident that happened with a naturalized U.S. citizen, Ivan Machado, who voted for Trump in 2020. He believed the administration's immigration enforcement would focus solely on criminals, not everyday Hispanic people like himself. Yet he was detained by ICE agents who mistook him for someone with a deportation order. After experiencing this firsthand, Machado admitted that his faith in Trump's immigration policies was shaken. His story is a perfect example of how political leaders use fear and scapegoating to gain power while convincing their followers that these policies will never harm them until they do. Veterans and government workers who supported Trump are now feeling the impact of DOGE cuts, finding themselves caught off guard. Many who once believed they were safeguarded by the administration's policies are now facing unexpected consequences, leaving them questioning the very system they trusted. This situation raises larger questions about political loyalty, government oversight, and the reality of how policies affect everyday people. And just how we saw Fred and Serena gaining a following in Canada, Trump maintains a devoted fan base despite controversy and legal troubles. Through propaganda, selective storytelling, and public sympathy, he reshapes his image. For example, Trump weaponizes religious and patriotic rhetoric to justify oppression, convincing his followers that any move towards equality is actually an attack on their way of life. The blind loyalty, the rewriting of history, and the belief that their suffering is caused by progress rather than the systems they uphold, all of it reflects how dangerous authoritarianism can be when disguised as moral or national revival. Throughout The Handmaid's Tale, Gilead silences dissent under the pretense of maintaining order, branding those who resist as traitors or enemies of the state. We see this tactic mirrored in the real world with the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil. Born in Syria and a graduate of Columbia, Khalil was taken into custody by immigration agents, a move directly linked to Trump's vow to crack down on student demonstrators he accuses of un-American activity. Trump has repeatedly claimed that pro-Palestinian activists, including Khalil, support Hamas and should be deported, calling his arrest the first of many to come. But Khalil's lawyers argue this isn't about security, it's about silencing political dissent. They insist he was simply exercising his First Amendment right, protesting in support of the Palestinians in Gaza and against the U.S.'s backing of Israel. This crackdown reflects a growing trend, using fear and accusations to justify suppression of free speech. This crackdown reflects a growing trend, using fear and accusations to justify suppressing free speech, much like Gilead does to maintain its grip on power. Now we face the question, how far can our government go before safety becomes a mask for control? Because it seems that free speech is only free speech in Trump's America when it fits his narrative, when it doesn't go against him. And this is crazy. We are seeing our civil liberties being trampled on in real time. Gilead slowly strips away rights under the pretense of maintaining order. It doesn't happen all at once. It's systematic, justified by fear and enforced through legal means. We're seeing this pattern emerge in real life. Just this week, the United States was added to the Human Rights Watch List, a global tracker of countries where civil liberties are under threat. This isn't just about one law or policy. It's a warning that fundamental freedoms like free speech and protest are being eroded. And in Texas, a proposed bill takes this even further, seeking to make identifying as transgender a felony punishable by jail time. Criminalizing someone's very existence is a dystopian reality that The Handmaid's Tale has already explored, where nonconformity is met with punishment, and the state dictates who has the right to live freely. This show warns us what happens when oppression is legalized, and right now, that warning feels more urgent than ever. All I can think about when I'm seeing these things come out is the flashbacks from pre-Gilead, where women, or any account with the F on it, is being frozen so women can no longer access their funds. Women are being laid off from jobs. Protesters are being beaten in the streets. It's really easy to say, oh, we'll never get to that point. It's never gonna happen. These are just far-fetched things you're reaching. But, I mean, with the things we're seeing today, I would hope it never gets to that point, and I don't want it to, but things are getting really scary. So just stay safe out there, stay aware, and just stay informed. And that pretty much wraps up my real-world parallels for this episode. Now, Season 4 is a masterclass in showing how revolutions unfold, slowly, painfully, and often at a great moral cost. June isn't just fighting against Gilead anymore, she's becoming something new. But what happens when you start embodying the same ruthlessness as your oppressors? I'd love to hear your thoughts on Season 4. Let's discuss it over on YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok. Thank you for tuning in to Blessed Be the Breakdown. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow, rate, subscribe, and share. It helps this podcast reach more people. I'll see you next Thursday as we dive into the first half of Season 5. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay informed, and as always, blessed be the fight.